Anna Danylchuk has been creating a war diary since the early days of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022. Anna aims to tell the truth about Ukraine and Russia's war and cut through the noise and propaganda. She is passionate about the beauty and independence of her country and communicates this powerfully in her videos in a clear and honest way. Welcome to the Silicon Curtain podcast. If you enjoy the materials we create, then please like and subscribe to help the work we do and help us to grow the channel. Also, do please consider becoming a patron or buy me a coffee. Although this is the fourth conversation I've been privileged to have with Anna on my channel, it's the first in what I hope will be a series of monthly conversations with influential YouTubers and experts on Russia and Ukraine. Anna, welcome back.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to visit your channel, your podcast, and I feel like this friendly atmosphere. So I'm happy and honored to be a part of our today's video.
Fantastic. No nerves anymore. This is like, revisiting an old friend, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. After we've met on a beautiful Silicon Curtain event in Lviv, I definitely feel it's like visiting a friend.
And let's start with the event, because that was my first trip to Ukraine. And of course, since friends, colleagues have found out that happened, actually very few colleagues, I'll come to that in a minute. But of course, people have been asking, well, what's it like? Not only that, I've been asked since then by a number of people I've interviewed who are also considering running events and, for various reasons, have not returned to Ukraine in wartime, or they've gone for very short trips and they haven't considered doing anything substantial. So it seems that what we did there is becoming potentially a catalyst for other people to, feel that they can go and make a difference and start to be a bit more ambitious.
Extremely important and extremely symbolic. I don't know if you remember, but during the event, I recollected one moment at the start of the invasion or just before the invasion. Many embassies and consulates left Ukraine because that is their codex, and it is totally correct, taking into account the dangers that war imposes on people and on diplomatical representatives. But from the other point of view, it felt really bad for me as a Ukrainian, because I realized they are leaving. And to some extent, in Putin's head, with his blitzkrieg, he imagined that really quickly in 3 days, he will change the regime, setting Russian people as Ukrainian government. He will start purges in regions. They had lists of people they were ready to execute or to imprison. And the world will accept, because there is no choice. And we do know that many global leaders were a bit ready to accept this bitter truth. And the absence of diplomatic offices in the country would also symbolize that it's not like 100% country, and everything could change really quickly, and then these pro-Russian people will start looking for pro-Russian people in other countries, influencing even European and American governments, and soon new embassies will reopen and some pro-Russian figures will speak on behalf of Ukrainian people. It did not happen. We united, we managed to survive these very decisive weeks of attack. After seeing a bravery and resilience of Ukrainian people, more and more started joining us and supporting us, and we are enormously and forever grateful for that. And then, one by one, embassies and consulates started returning. Not their normal stuff, I understand that, and I think that it's not yet the situation, but at least 2 or 3 ambassadors started visiting, then EU and US politicians. And it all seems like, well, nothing changes drastically in the reality after a brief visit of, for example, President Biden to Kyiv. But this is an enormously important political, diplomatical gesture. And when these embassies and consulates returned, it was just like another proof that no, Ukraine exists, Ukraine is the country that people want it to see, and it is legitimate. And events like yours, like ours, because I feel a part of that, are extremely important and symbolic because they also show that despite constant dangers, missile attacks, blackouts that may come back, and other things, Ukraine is operating as a country and as a center of democracy and new ideas. And I do understand it is dangerous to visit Ukraine. You, in our interview, also you can visit my channel and watch a really beautiful conversation with Jonathan. And I do like this conversation for the number of ideas that appeared. And you were saying that you feel perfectly safe in Lviv. And then a couple of days later, Lviv was targeted. My city, which is semi-dangerous, really semi-dangerous, was targeted, killing 3 people. So of course I cannot invite people to Ukraine. But if you feel like you are ready, you are brave enough, you have reasons, of course it is important because it shows that the country works, the country continues not only in this military field, but also in political, cultural, economic, educational. All of that is super important. And of course, such events, first of all, they once again demonstrate that Ukraine is healthy. It's just the Russians who shake us. Also that reminds people about what is happening. And of course, this is a great symbol of solidarity.
And do you think it's important as well? I mean, I came with a purpose. I think if there wasn't that purpose to run the event, it's likely that I may not have come, or if I had come along in a sort of semi-touristic fashion, I may have felt that was sort of frivolous and unnecessary, and I had a very different sensation. I think coming over, having interviews arranged, having a specific event to work towards, that certainly helped to push any sort of fears and worries to the back of my mind. But also, I think in wartime, if you go to a country, you potentially put a strain on its resources. So if you go, I think it's important to actually have a purpose. Maybe you've got an influential audience, and you're going to show something about life and resilience. Maybe you are able to outreach to politicians and so on. But do you think it's right that people could just turn up, or is it still the period where it's people who are, let's say, sort of influential or have a specific reason, whether it's sort of volunteering, supporting, helping, bringing supplies? It's important to have some kind of sort of guiding role that brings you to Ukraine.
Of course, it's always good in any business that you start, in any art that you develop, when you have a purpose, because it makes everything meaningful and it organizes all the event properly. And Ukraine needs support right now, be it volunteering, be it advocacy, I don't know, showing more of its real life. At the very beginning of this war, on my channel, I had some subscribers commenting that soon you will feel what war tourism is, and you will see people coming and watching the destructions that Russians caused. And some of these people had experience of war, for example, from Croatia, so they knew what they were talking about. And I felt really bad. I felt really bad about that, because it's like visiting an ill relative, but not for the purpose of talking to him or helping him, but seeing him in that state. But my attitude changed during this 1.5 years of war, and witnessing how drastically people change when they see real war. Mm-hmm. I try to explain war, if it's possible to say so, on my channel. Though living in a semi-dangerous zone, I did not witness everything. I haven't been to the front lines. I didn't spend nights in the underground. But war is everywhere, and I'm trying to show this perspective, like of an ordinary Ukrainian living this life, ordinary life in extraordinary environment. But first, this presidential delegations, political delegations were taken to Bucha and Irpin. And once again, when it all began, I felt pretty uncomfortable about that. But then I realized that as a Ukrainian, I have to see these destructions and I have to feel what it is. And my first trip to Kyiv was this winter. And when I was approaching, I saw this burnt parts of land, destroyed houses. And I felt it's important to see it, not to avoid that knowledge. And to some extent, now I understand that this war tourism has its purpose, also has its purpose. Because many people, the majority of people, including me, would have never understood what war is without seeing it. It's like talking about hunger. Until you're not hungry, you will not be able to understand what's that. Some kind of fear, or like stories can be beautiful, videos can be informative, but until you see it, and many people, when they really see this like ordinary house, a cafe, totally burnt out, I don't know, shoes of people lying on the streets, this is when they feel what war is, and they stop giving advice like negotiate, because they imagine their own houses like that, or they understand like why do we need so much money. For example, there are lots of people, when they see this packs of burnt cars, they realize, oh my God, so the car can be destroyed in just a day on front lines. And you say, yes, this is what happens. Like they are daily destroyed, either because of really bad roads, which happens. And most of these cars are old. They are not new cars, military cars, but brought from EU. Also, missiles, other stuff, or when it is broken somewhere in a front line, no one will get evacuated. So we lose like hundreds of cars a day. That's why we need hundreds of cars every day. And then people start thinking, oh yes, then it's reasonable. It's not just Ukrainians are greedy and trying to get as many as possible. No. So that is why, to some extent, I think that any visit to Ukraine can be useful and can get its purpose. The only thing is that you will have time. I hope that we will win soon, and you will have time to see this awful terrorist destructions and to witness what true face of war is later when it is safe. Now, if you choose to travel to Ukraine, it has to be first a very conscious decision. Second, you have to be very attentive, because all of us are a bit trained, you know, a year and a half of war, and I know how to react. I know what dangers are, like the scale of dangers. Do not ignore that, and do not treat war as fun, because once again, you may think it will never happen to me in this city. And then, like, we had 3 people killed in a totally civilian object in Lutsk that did not witness anything like that since October.
And of course, you know, while we were filming, the air raid siren went off. And I think, you know, this is one of the questions people have asked, you know, what do people do in Lviv? How do they react to the air raid siren? And I had to be honest. I said, well, because the city's only been hit, now it's been hit twice. In the more central part of the city, I think in the early weeks it was hit on the outskirts, more near a sort of military facility, but it's been hit twice, 3 times now, because it was hit a few days after we left Lviv as well. But nonetheless, you know, it's a huge city on a huge territory. So most people, I think, have an understanding that the probability of being hit by a missile in Lviv is extremely low. You're far more likely to probably get run over by a bicycle or a bus or a car or have an accident of some sort if you
That's an
think
additional
about it
thing. Like,
mathematically. It's very
you can
rational.
still have problems on a bike or
Yes.
eaten by a dog, but still, plus one more problem, you can be killed
Yeah,
by orcs.
absolutely. But, and superficially, people will not react necessarily in Lviv, at least, to the air raid sirens. But I make the point to people that doesn't mean that it's not psychologically wearing. Just because the probability of being hurt in Lviv is low, it's a constant psychological reminder that someone somewhere is being targeted, that someone somewhere is in far more extreme danger. And psychologically, that must be extremely wearing for everybody who hears those sirens going off 3 or 4 times a day. Sometimes in the middle of the night, it'll wake you up. It's a constant reminder that Russia is attacking.
It's not just a reminder. Many people, like I remember when I started my vlog, lots of people were telling me, "Oh my God, why do you use this old style sirens? We have that on our mobile phones. The reason is different, a hurricane or a tornado, but still." And then you tell them, guys, sometimes when Russians attack, you don't have internet and mobile, and there is no possibility to warn you. So we have like sirens. Then when we had blackouts, and sirens depend on electricity, they use it to produce the sound. We had firefighting machines driving around the city and giving the signal so that people can know. Apart from this psychological reminder that somewhere people are suffering more, and there are places where people do not go out for days, especially close to the front lines, it is also a constant reminder that we are being killed because we are Ukrainians. I read one quote of a Ukrainian author, writer, Danylchuk, it seems to me, who said that, like, me, I'm a good writer, you read my books, but for Russians, I'm just a sack with bones, and like millions of Ukrainians that they simply want to kill. So this is also a reminder of the fact that missiles are coming to your country, maybe to you, to your house, to your capital, which is always yours. It's not an alien city, even if I don't live there. But they are coming to kill you because you are a Ukrainian and because Russia hates you so much. And of course, what people forget, like the worst reminder, are funerals. I do not film them in respect for people. Like, I know some relatives want that because they want the world to know about the sacrifice of that family. But perhaps you've seen a lot of them. Like, I see them. Maybe you have to pay attention to notice this, but almost in every church, twice, 3 times a week, you will witness that, or you will see flowers on the ground. This is one of my first memories when war came to Ukraine in 2014, that I went out on the square and I saw lots of flowers on the ground, like roses. And before the war, you had like pleasant associations. You thought, oh my God, maybe that was a romantic date, or a princess was riding in her chariot. And then you realize these were people throwing flowers when the coffin of the hero was carried. And now, whenever I see flowers on the ground, I know what they mean. And even if it was a romantic date, I don't have like normal associations. And what we forget about, saying that Western Ukraine is like safe and maybe they don't feel war, members of all families are on front lines, and the number of people from Western Ukraine who are in Ukrainian armed forces is really high, which means they are constantly on telephone contact, checking messages, waiting for the answer after 3 days of silence. So war is not like it did not destroy all the infrastructure as it did in some parts of Ukraine, but it did destroy normality, and people are carrying that in their heart. They are thinking about their husbands, brothers, daughters. And another thing, just very simple and irritating, is that this air raid alerts, even if you turn off this regime and you don't feel that bad every time you hear them, they interfere in your daily life. And you planned, for example, to spend some time in a bank, I don't know, to buy something or to have a birthday party. Of course, some will ignore, but the majority of official institutions, banks, I don't know, bureaucracy,
Shops,
offices,
supermarkets, yeah.
shops, supermarkets, they close.
Mm.
And you will not be able to do anything. And just imagine this. I remember once like visiting, there was a funny thing, a trade center quite far away from me. And it was like 3 or 4 days in a row that I was coming to that training center, and air alert started. I went to the parking to wait for it to finish. It was winter. It was so cold on that parking lot. I don't know, colder than outside. And I left, and like 3 or 4 days in a row, I could not enter that trade center. And that also irritates, because this is just like your ordinary routine. And another fact is that you don't feel safe sometimes, even in the shelters, because not all of the shelters were constructed as bomb shelters. We forget about that too, because like we did not live in the times of Cold War. Many of the buildings were constructed later, and they don't have enough parking places, not mentioning like real shelters.
That's it. I mean, I was in a building that clearly had a small shelter that was far too small for the number of residents in the building, but because it was an old building, an historic centre, it was more like an 18th century wine cellar. And we didn't have to go and spend time there, which was fortunate, but it'd be difficult to imagine actually, all the residents packed into it. Quite unfeasible, actually, and terrifying. And it's a reminder of my own relatives who lived through the Blitz. And this is another interesting, I think, angle. And when we came to Lviv, we talked to locals, and because I had a collaborator on the ground who did a lot of the logistics and so on, a lot of people knew the event was happening. His friends, associates, colleagues. He's got a lot of contacts within City Hall, so he knows a lot of the officials and people. And some of them expressed a concern to him, which was, well, look, you're coming here and you're filming, and lots of people are going to see this. And to an extent, they're going to get the impression that Lviv is modern and vibrant and extremely beautiful and cultured, and it could be like Prague or some other incredible European destination. Their worry was that if we showed the beauty of Ukraine, if we showed the sophistication of Ukraine, that somehow people would not want to send weapons, because they say, well, why? Why are we protecting Ukraine? They're as sophisticated as we are. I thought the absolute opposite, which is that people will be able to empathize more if you show the extraordinary vibrancy of the culture and the life and what people are fighting for, and how similar in many ways Ukrainians are living and protecting really good living standards they've created by their own hard work and ingenuity. And by showing this, my belief is that people will empathize more and support more. I don't know what your thoughts are on what to show and how to portray Ukraine.
No, well, we have to portray Ukraine realistically, the way it is. And what you describe about Ukraine, I consider totally true. Ukraine, my editor-in-chief of the daily newspaper The Day used to say one phrase that I often repeat, that with this war, with this tragic war, Ukraine has become the greatest geographical discovery of the 21st century. It was hidden in the shade of the Iron Curtain, and many people did treat it as a part of Russia. And sometimes when I start telling something to my subscribers, they ask me, Anna, keep it simple, because just a year ago I knew nothing about your country, so don't overload me with the I don't know, hierarchy of princes. But I think that when people know something, when people identify something, when people recognize something, and especially when people like something, they tend to care more and worry more. If you have friends in this country, if you have your favorite restaurants or hotels where you felt happy, you will feel more anxious, more worried about the country, and you will want, like, it's personal. And with my vlog, I do want to make Ukraine personal to those people who watch me, because I'm trying to show this like citizen perspective, and I think it's important. But the same, I am very grateful for the phrase that you've used in our interview when you said that Ukraine is purely European. And not because we've chosen our direction to the European Union, but because we were Europe in the Middle Ages. In between, Cossacks demonstrate very European values. And all of that together shows that, no, Ukraine is not an alien Russian province, just a rebellious one or something. No, this is a European country that shares much of your heritage, wants to return back, constantly invaded by an abuser, bully, or the style empire, dying empire. And something, it's just like when people recognize similar streets, similar faces, similar restaurants, they feel it's closer. They can imagine something similar might have happened to their country. And the tragedy is that if we don't win, it may really happen to many of the countries that Russia considers in its zone of influence. And there are many of them, many more than we think. It all seems unbelievable and impossible, but this war seemed unbelievable and impossible too. So I am extremely grateful to you and other people who introduced the world to Ukraine, demonstrated real faith. And this faith is not Russian, this faith is very different. I do believe that when they see some beautiful, interesting things, they understand what are we protecting, what are we fighting, because it's not just Ukrainian heritage, it's global heritage.
And that's interesting. We'll come to that in a minute because some of my impressions were fantastic of not just the city, but also I had the chance to go out to the countryside. But we'll talk to that in a minute. But I think one of the real impressions I also get is that people tend to forget that Finland now is a vibrant, extremely wealthy country, very well organized, clean, and has a very distinct identity within Europe and the world. We forget that in the 19th century, Finland was one of the poorest provinces of the Russian Empire. It was a territory of sort of fishermen and farmers, extremely poor, and as Russians would see it, backwards, pointless. You can go back and see the imperial literature of the time. Ukraine was far more sophisticated, far more urban, far more European in that period. And of course, when Ukrainian nationalism emerged to try and create a sort of distinct identity and the movement to try and draw itself out once again from under the Russian yoke, it really emphasizes, to me at least, the effect of the Soviet Union, in holding countries back, in causing their infrastructure, their architecture, their heritage to be kind of in some ways put in a deep freeze. This is the process you're fighting against as well. And I think it's something that a lot of people do not realize, that if Russia was to take over Ukraine again, and as it has done in the eastern Donbass, what you would look at is economic and cultural stagnation. not just repression, which is easier to imagine, but a kind of sort of stagnation of everything in society, both purposeful, but also because the Russian economic and political system is not vibrant, it's not innovative, it's not creative, it's not free. So you're fighting against these sort of twin horrors, as it were, of overt oppression, but also a system of government which is utterly alien to Ukraine and is extremely, I would say, unproductive.
Yes, like Soviet Union was a monster, and to some extent is a monster that is based on a totally like impossible philosophy. Communism cannot like achieve its goals, and the Soviet Union demonstrated it perfectly. It created a very big trauma inside Ukrainian society that has always been focused on the support, development, and growth of private property. In Ukrainian naive philosophy, you will see that owning something, having something, being responsible for something is very, very important. And throughout Ukrainian history, we did not have like this serious periods of serfdom. It was not common. Like it was because there were such fashions in history, but it was incomparably easier than the one Russia practiced until we were occupied by Russian Empire. And this respect to private property, possibilities, and strong middle class was something that terrified Russia when it occupied Ukraine in the 20s. And that's the reason for Holodomor, one of the reasons for Holodomor. Lots of Ukrainian peasants having normal fields, horses, and cows did not want to go to collective farms. And this collective attitude demonstrated that if nothing belongs to anyone, it gets ruined, stolen, and dilapidated. And that's why Soviet Union collapsed, because nothing belongs to anyone. Corrupt leaders of party pretending that everyone is equal. And once again, Soviet Union is the father of corruption, of this negotiations that people need to hold. And yes, they try to bring this narratives that look at Ukraine, it might be corrupt, something, but even, of course, there are problems. First of all, there are problems in every country, and there are corrupt politicians. This is a kind of reality. But of course, Ukraine has problems. I'm not going to deny that. But guys, realize you are looking at Ukraine. You see it. You see all of its garbage. You see all of its problems. You can discuss with us the things that you dislike. We have active society who's constantly like mocking, catching, recording, all of that. And the process is very positive, like. And then you say that Ukraine is also corrupt, just like Russia. And what can you say about Russia? What can you do in Russia? Have you seen any like investigations? Have you seen any actions taken by that society? Do you see any signal that Putin will change and someone different will come? Do you see that this country is actually the mother and the exporter of corruption to Germany, to France, to the US, to other countries? That's the problem. Not like Ukraine has a problem, but it's a kind of a problem many of other countries have. And Russia, with their totally hierarchical criminal oligarchic organization. When you try like to say, well, Ukraine is not different from Russia, think twice, because it's really different. You see all of our problems. We are like on this visit to a doctor telling you all the symptoms and telling you all the problems. And Russia says everything is fine. You have to copy our lifestyle. Ruski mir, you know, everything is perfect. One president for 30 years. Look at that, like no transparency, friends and other oligarchs ruling the country, like it. Guys, And a very vivid example that I often comment to my trolls who like inspire my work too. I don't know how, but I drink energy and blood of Russian trolls that come to my channel. And I always tell them, if you like Russia so much, why don't you move to Russia? It's not that dangerous as in Ukraine right now. You can like Ukraine, but it's dangerous to move and stay here. But in Russia, it's totally safe. Why? I don't see thousands and millions of people who have this Russian dream to come and stay in Russia, to come and study in Russia, to come to a hospital in Russia and get your operational teeth done, for example. Why don't we see that? Why Lavrov and Putin have like their daughters and sons living outside Russia, and then trolls typically have nothing to say. They say, "Well, I wanted to see Siberia, wanted to see something different than moving and emigrating." I know lots of people always like, this is a tendency observed for centuries that populations like to move westwards. But if Russia is so strong and so innovative and so rich, why there are no processes? I'm not saying about 2 or 3 or like 1,000 people. I'm thinking about like this general processes. We know EU often says, oh, we have problems with immigration. Why? Low, high standards, lots of people want to live there, lots of people want this kind of security, education. I don't know. It's understandable. No reverse
Absolutely.
project, no reverse movement. Why? Why, if Russia is so great, so traditional, values, strong faith, rich nature, best
And
Hmm.
I think this is also true. I mean, some of the trolls we know are likely to be based in Russia as well. And occasionally I get people who are clearly trolling, but in a more sophisticated way. And they will also openly say that they've lived or are living in Russia. And, you know, my simple answer to that is, well, I've been there. I can speak your language. I know what you and your compatriots are saying about the country. So, I can tune in and understand what critics of Russia who are Russian are saying. Often trolls will dismiss them as sources, like like their criticism of Ukrainians. They'll say the Ukrainians are broken Russians. They'll say that Russian oppositionists are somehow polluted by the West and are no longer Russian. But I can shut them down normally with like, well, I've been to Vorkuta. Have you? Have you seen what your country looks like?
Museum. Yeah.
Um, yes,
When
it's a very special place. But I think that's part of the problem. I mean, there are Russians who probably are under less illusion now about what their country is like. But if you go back to 2012, you could live in the center of Moscow and St. Petersburg. You could create the illusion for yourself that you live in a sophisticated country. You've got shopping malls, you've got this, you've got that, you've got the material trappings, the sort of external varnish of civilization. And you could convince yourself that the process that created them is the same, that Europe and Russia are somehow the same things and have the same dynamic, ignoring that the mechanism that gave you these luxuries, these superficial luxuries, on the one hand, is very different from the mechanism that created them and sustains them in Europe. I'm not sure people can have as many illusions now. We'll come to that in a minute, because I think the sort of the authoritarian nature of their regime is now more and more difficult to hide. But this really underlines, I think, the difference between being superficially European and copying lifestyles, behaviors, consumer culture, and being deeply European. And certainly from my trip to Ukraine, absolutely get that sense that Ukraine is entirely European and is now blowing away, that Russification that was superficially painted on like a sort of crude coat of paint.
Yes, and Ukrainians, like during Soviet era, especially at the end of Soviet Union, people lacked everything, like clothes, food. Even the 90s that were like the continuation of the Soviet period, I cannot tell you that I remember much of this dying Soviet Union. I do remember some queues that we were standing with my mom and we had to spend like hours to get some butter, but this is just like 3 4 year old memories, so you cannot just like paintings. And people were super hungry. I mean, like metaphorically, for the goods, the clothes, the jeans were forbidden in Soviet Union and other stuff. So people were hungry to get all of that. And it was like driving people crazy, the access to McDonald's and other things that you've got used to. You had them for decades. They don't mean anything to you. And they were symbols for the post-Soviet people. I remember like when I was at school and first serious malls opened in Kyiv, and there would be lots of people who would travel and to take pictures in that malls. Like I've been there. I cannot imagine myself taking a picture now in like Berlin Mall or something. I'm busy there, you know. But now, for example, I had a visit in June in Berlin and I had some free time and I'm a girl, and I went to the shop and I started looking one thing, another thing. And what struck me is the fact that like we have everything. Even during war, there is nothing that can like surprise me as a person from Eastern Europe or Soviet. There is no like product or clothes or perfume or anything or in a supermarket that I will. Of course, as like traveling in any culture, you find something interesting, you find something cheaper or tastier. But I mean, there is no this civilizational surprise, like what's that? What kind of deodorant? I know all of that. And it made me feel even a little bit emotional because I realized how much we've moved forward. I mean, like how much we've actually integrated into this normal, healthy Western society, and how this war actually prevents us from developing and evolving. That's what people try not to focus. We don't have a choice, but it is stealing our time. Many people, for example, of my age, they say, oh my God, we have like the golden period of our like career and development totally interrupted, and we will not get back like this. Of course, we adapt, we survive. I'm grateful that I'm able to work, but it's true, it's not the time of travels, it's not the time of conferences, it's not the time of starting a business. All of that is taken away and it will never be returned. So Ukrainians are sacrificing a lot, but having access to all of the products and clothes and other stuff, we've mentioned to go beyond that. And we started craving for the things that stand behind these products and services. And we looked deeper. So we do not repeat like this rich Russians attitude, I can buy that, I can come there, this is an expensive fur coat. We try to think what stands behind this like product, this services, and we wanted to create our own like trademarks and so on. And for example, in this traumatized post-Soviet generation, it was super popular to buy an expensive car, for example, or to buy expensive boots, and people will save money to buy these boots to show off. And Russians continue doing that, and Ukrainians traveling around Europe, they do not hate people in well-developed countries as Russians do. They try to copy paste, and they come and they realize it's stupid. If I don't have my flat, it's stupid to buy a super expensive car. Or it's not okay to collect 3 of your salaries to buy yourself boots. Then perhaps it's not yet your boots, or maybe it is even silly to spend that much money on boots. And for example, in my generation, you will see many people who are successful, but they don't drive Porsches I'm not saying it's a bad car. It's good if you've earned, like, it's possible. But at the same time, Russians, they like to show off, and this like boyar tsar style and so on. And in Ukraine, we've actually started looking beyond that, what stands behind the successful businesses. There's really good services, and we want to copy that, not the
I think this is
product.
an absolutely critical difference that people need to understand, because you travel through the countryside around Lviv, and I spent a lot of time it has to be admitted, it's 2 decades ago, but I spent a lot of time in the 90s traveling around in Russia. And what you've described there is absolutely the case. You go through the Russian countryside and you'll have a huge diversity of the size of houses. You'll have little small ones, traditional ones. You'll have ones that are in a terrible state. You'll have ones that are abandoned. You'll occasionally have ones that are very neatly kept and painted and so on. But you will also get big cottages, and they'll come in all different shapes and sizes. And they'll clearly be ones that are built by very rich people, or people who've managed to acquire money at a certain point. Doesn't mean they're constantly rich, as you say. To show off, you invest everything you've
Oh,
got
yeah.
in show. It may even bankrupt you. And again, what you see in parts of the Russian countryside is a lot of cottages out in the country where people have started building them, and their ambitions, their ego, their desire to show off has been greater than their means. And this is a metaphor, I think, for Russia and its entire imperialist ambition, actually. And they will have abandoned these houses or cottages halfway through. So the number of buildings that are simply half built and now open to the rain and decaying, it very much reflects, I think, this idea that you've acquired money, you've acquired it suddenly, perhaps. You may or may not have acquired it honestly, but you want to invest it as quickly as you can, like a squirrel trying to bury its nuts, and stop someone else finding them. And it's very much a backward-looking philosophy, because you've stolen your money or acquired your money, you've put it into something egotistical. It may or may not work out, but essentially it is not based on an idea of future wealth. It's not based on an idea of future plenty and gradually, earning or acquiring. It's get as much as you can with the fear that maybe somebody else will take it off you. Maybe this won't last. Whereas it seems to me the Ukrainian way is now, as you say, it wasn't immediately the case, but now it's like, well, we have a future and we believe in the future, and therefore you don't have to spend it all now in the present. You can eke it out. And that to me is much more European, the idea that the future is going to be richer than the present, and it's worth investing and building gradually towards that future.
That is a very good observation, and you are totally right about that. Russians try to spend it, like to get it quickly and spend it quickly, which actually demonstrates first that their future, they realize that future does not belong to them, and they have no serious influence on their future. Because who could have predicted, for example, sanctions? Well, I know that my country will behave that way, that if I have, I don't know, a small business department in Poland, we will not do anything crazy so that I will not have an opportunity to travel to Poland. I realize, like, I cannot imagine anything like that. In Russia, there are lots of things that people first cannot predict. They've lost this ability, this instinct to predict and prognose, perhaps. And future first does not belong to them. And as a result, they don't believe in it. Moreover, Putin also does not believe in this future. What they live on is their past. Actually, they are one of these like empires, dying empires that are so past oriented. And even when he tries to persuade, like as a linguist, I know that most of the political discourse is future oriented. Why? Because it's easier to make people believe that future is better than present. Plus, you can never need, you cannot guarantee verifications. You're saying, we will be, blah, blah, blah. And that's normal. That's the way human brain works. It's not just the manipulation. That's the way we live. We are future oriented. All people are future oriented, and Russia is past oriented. And even playing with his electorate or with soldiers or something, they focus on past victories. They don't say, we will become members of NATO and you will have better boots, or you will have higher salaries, or you will be able to travel the world and earn more money. They say, do you remember how your grandparents, cold, hungry, were sitting? That is one of the greatest differences. Ukraine, a country at war, where every location can be targeted. And we have so many people building houses or reconstructing houses, doing the repairments. In many regions, including Kyiv, the prices for real estate did not fall. This is actually, like, to some extent, it's absurd, because, like, come on, sometimes a house or a flat in Kyiv will cost just like a house in Prague or in Warsaw. And that's kind of weird, because first of all, these countries are long-time EU members and the standards are a bit higher. And second, these are global capitals and they don't have war. But I like it because it demonstrates what? Total confidence of Ukrainian people that we will win this war and we will continue building our country the way we want. And I remember reading this funny comments on Facebook during the first months of war that typically I hated my neighbors who would drill in the morning doing some repairments, but now I love them. What an optimism. For example, during a night, a couple of missiles destroyed a couple of buildings and people are doing repairments. So I think, but this is a demonstration of 100 confidence that future belongs to us. Russians, they distort our present, they kill us, they ruin, but we are not going to give up and we are not going to give that to them. And this is another great civilizational difference. Russians live in the past, they cannot control future. Ukrainians live with the idea that in the next decade we will get a better life, a stronger country, a safer environment. Even during war. And war is not happening on Russian territory. Okay, a little bit. Some drones, beautiful drones are flying at this night too, but in general, not having this level of destruction, they do not believe in their own country. And we, with all that destructions and blackouts, feel everything is going to be all right. And one more thing, all of these beautiful Russian bloggers, young people who live the country, they also demonstrate they don't believe in their future in their country. They gave up on their country. They continue developing their personalities, but they do not unite in groups, alternative exile political parties or anything. Why? They've lost their feeling they can change and build something in their country, atrophied, or how do you say, like, atrophy?
Atrophy, yeah.
They don't even think about that. They can help Ukrainian armed forces. They may say Putin is bad, and everybody says, oh my God, a Russian said Putin is bad. It's not heroism, guys. And they are not building something. They are not thinking that maybe one day, if you're 20, you have like possibly 60 years of active work. Why don't you visualize changing Russia in 10, 20 years? Why aren't you building a background? Atrophy.
And I think it's very deep down is the understanding that if you invest in something, the future is uncertain. You take refuge in the past, in sort of illusions of the past because they seem more certain. But if you do manage to build something, whether it be a company or a nice house or whatever, there's always the risk that someone will steal it from you because there is no sanctity of property.
In 90s we had the same, but somehow the number of people who wanted to build and oppose those who steal was larger. I think, like, if you recollect, I don't know, Middle Ages in Great Britain, it was just the same. But at a certain moment of time, the level of social development and activism reaches the point when people say, hey, stop, this is mine. You're not going to do that. People unite. Once again, all of them lost the ability to unite. Ukraine is extremely united. You're saying about these dangers they face. Ukraine faces greater dangers of real destruction, of a real huge iron stuff, ruining all of your business, your life, killing your family. It's incomparable to some bandits coming to you and saying you have to give them. And people do not unite in Russia so that you're not alone with that criminal one-to-one. But there are many of you who say, hey, come on, you're just one loser with 10 years in prison like Prigozhin. No, they are silent, they are alone, and they are suffering. And you know, at one point of view, so many beautiful people abroad start thinking that, okay, Ukrainians are lucky, they can change something, and Russians, poor Russians, victims Russians, guys, and you even forget that Russians actually bomb us, they kill us, they destroy our infrastructure. 1/3 of the country is not okay for living at all. They ruin schools, universities, they intervene in education, hospital life, everything, and still we look stronger and luckier than they are. That's bullshit, I'm sorry. That's not that bad as like it will not get you demonetized. I repeat this.
It's in the last hour, so we're good. Yeah.
No, that's okay. So stop thinking about that. Like poor Russians cannot do anything. I honestly think if someone would attack Russia as they did to us, I mean, with this prevalence in people, in old weapons, Blitzkrieg would be successful and Moscow would fall in 3 days because they are not able to protest. They are not able to withstand without this strong arm. Society, there is no society, there is population. And this population is totally dispersed, unable to build, unable to protest. And that's why more than 250,000 died. They say it's dangerous to protest, but you've lost so many soldiers already, guys. You've lost like 1/4 of a million, if not more, of people on this war, and you still think it's dangerous to protest?
And it doesn't matter really to them who is the dominating force. Stalin was a Georgian. Khrushchev, I believe, was Ukrainian. Gorbachev, I think, had Ukrainian roots. It doesn't matter who dominates them, as you say, and who is the sort of the Tsar in the Kremlin. It's all the same. Nothing's going to change.
They were still, even like I personally believe that like your birth nationality does not mean much. It's a political choice. And if you think about this, Khrushchev, Gorbachev, and Stalin, they were pro-Moscow people.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's end on, I think, a positive impression from the trip to Ukraine. And I think it sort of ties up a lot of the conversation we've had about agency, the future, investing and belief in the future. But also it gets down to very specific details of how individuals behave towards each other and the concepts of society. Because the thing that really stunned me was not visiting the city, was not seeing, beautiful Lviv. It was going out into the countryside, and we drove along some main roads where you had very neat, very well cared for country cottages, weekend cottages outside the city. But we also went off road. My host Arest has a fantastic 4x4, and we went deep into farm tracks right up into the hills where we saw other, more, working farms and cottages. And the overwhelming impression I had is that there's no rubbish. People don't throw their rubbish out by the roadsides. The roadsides are cleaned and cared for. Each individual will not only look after their own properties, which are very, very neat, but they'll make sure that the little ditch and the side of the road is clean and cared for next to their plot of land. They take ownership for what's around them, not just their own, small piece of land. And when it comes to those cottages, they're extremely neat and well cared for. You have little flower pots, plots, vegetable plots, fruit trees with all the fruit on them. No one's stealing each other's fruit. That also is a revelation. If you've been to the Russian countryside, you'll know.
Still,
Fruit, fruit doesn't last long. But all the houses were neat. There wasn't sort of, one or two nice ones and the rest has sort of gone to ruin. They were all pretty much neat. Different periods of construction, some looked a little older, some looked a little newer, but they were also of very similar size. So it creates an extraordinary impression. And, when I was talking to Arest, he says, well, of course, people want to keep their houses clean and tidy for themselves, but they also are very aware that their neighbors are looking, that the neighbors may judge somebody who lets things go to ruin. So you have an awareness of creating a decent standard of living for yourself. You also have an awareness that there's such a thing as society, and society has rules and standards, and you may be judged if you fall beneath those standards. And no one is building houses that are hugely ostentatious. There's none of these sort of 3-floor cottages looking over somebody else's sort of more modest one. So you don't have this huge disparity in wealth. You don't have this desire to massively show off in front of your neighbors. In fact, you seem to have a strong concern of what your neighbors might think. That made a huge impression on me because it brings together everything we've talked about, investing not just in the future, but investing in this thing called society, and having a belief that you need to order your life so that you can live better, but also that you can live up to a certain sort of common set of standards and rules. So I don't know if you feel that. I mean, you may not have traveled in the Russian countryside, and I can tell you it is very, very different.
When you are saying this, I recognize 100% of what you are saying. It has, of course, it has like all the pluses, like the minor minus. Come and try to change something on your streets, and you will get lots of people. We have these fights, like where a garbage can is going to stand, or who some people want to paint. This weird Ukrainian tradition to paint trees white, the trunks, so that it prevents them from parasites or something. But it's not a proved theory. It's just like. And many people think it's good, others think it's bad. And you will have all the yard if you start painting the trees that are not yours, but everybody's, which is from one point of view is not a big business. Nothing will happen to that tree. It's not your tree. It's not even giving you apples. It's just, I don't know, something else, a linden tree. But people are involved in that. And that is a huge victory. But I think it was always like that. I honestly think it's not just because from one point of view, there were lots of Ukrainians traveling the world, working. And I know that this is a normal tendency. I'm not trying to deny that. Many Ukrainians were working on minor positions in the UK or in Germany, because Poland is a well-developed country, but at the beginning of 2000s, they had a similar wave, moving westwards. That's normal. And people from England moved to the US when it gave more opportunities. That is a totally normal period. Well, and then later it all settles down because many people want to return. And even now, lots of immigrants, they want to return back to Ukraine. And people, when they see this better standards of living, longer history of private property and other stuff, once again, they don't hate it. They don't say rotten West. They, as one of my subscribers said, copy paste. Okay, I like I don't know, Italian style of kitchens. Lots of Ukrainians were working as pizzaiolas and other stuff. Italy was one of the destinations. And then when they earn enough money, they've spent 10 years working there, they return back home, they want to live here, and they copy paste what they liked in Italy, adapting it to Ukrainian realities and not like hating, oh, crazy Italians living a better life. But also, when I looked deeper into history, I realized that Zaporizhzhia Sich and Kozaki was only possible because people wanted to unite against something. They realized Tatars, Muscovites spoil our lifestyle, they won't let us live the way we want, so we have to get united. That's why every Ukrainian cares for its house, cares for its street. We are often dissatisfied with our local authorities, lots of bureaucracy. We always speak about that. When you go out in Ukrainian, like this regional Facebook, which is not interesting at all, but there are lots of groups where you mock your mayor, where you picture photos of something you don't like changed in the park, and people react. Mayor may be angry, like you may have quarrels, but this is a constant process of change. And when people are fed up with something, then they start collecting money, for example, and doing it by themselves. Why? Because they want this normal living. And we say, we have to wait, I don't know, 3 more months for this electricity or internet line to be mended. So it's easier for us to pay money, not to wait for the city to do all of this circles, but to invest and have this internet tomorrow. And people do that. Once again, because we are united. Volunteering wouldn't be possible if the country was not like that. And that's a huge phenomenon. And I'm really proud of that. And I don't want to say this is built somewhere in DNA or something, but quite likely, because Ukraine and Russia went through similar tragedies and traumas and experiences. And Ukraine tends to hate Stalin, tends to hate totalitarian regimes, and Russia, on contrary, wants to return them. So there is this huge civilizational gap that cannot be explained with 1 or 2 reasons, but perhaps a whole set of these differences between us.
Well, Anna, it's been absolutely brilliant talking again. I know I'm on holiday, so apologies to anyone for the noises in the background there that you may pick up. I'll try and edit most of those out. And that also explains the slightly disheveled appearance here. This is a holiday video, but some fantastic insights there. And I'm huge. Sorry.
Imagine how those people who are working right now will feel jealous that you are on a vacation.
Absolutely. I'm going to go swimming in a lake in a minute. It's nice and pure, simple sort of holiday stuff. I'm also wanted to say, or use this opportunity to say how grateful I am to you for supporting the event we ran in Lviv. It was a tremendous privilege to be able to meet you in real life and to do the video that we shot in the center of town, which if people haven't seen that yet, then I really encourage them. We'll pop a link in the description so they can go and see that video, which was tremendous fun. And you can also
link my interview with you because you're saying lots of important things in that conversation.
That is it. I'm definitely going to put the link to that one there. And fingers crossed, hopefully we'll get the chance to do that again.
Thank you so much for being a friend of mine and of Ukraine. This means a lot in these challenging times, and we have to construct this positive future together. Thank you.